All right, good morning. It is the 20th day of January in the Lord's year 2020. 1/20/2020. We'll never have a 2020. That's a pretty good date. All right. It's also Martin Luther King Day. And I decided that I wanted to do a special Martin Luther King show today. And I want to take a look at racism in America in 2020. Martin Luther King, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about him in case you don't know who he was. I'm going to share some of my favorite quotes of his. I have Macisms, and very few of those Macisms are by my hand or, made up by me. Most of them are borrowed from folks greater than I. And Martin Luther King is one of my favorite Macism guy or quotes guy, because he really knew how to say something and have an impact on somebody in a very few short words. Now, Macisms don't have to be, 7 words or less, or great quotes 7 words or less. But it's better if they're shorter, simply because it's easier for people to remember them. So, first of all, a little bit about Martin Luther King. And, oh, by the way, you are certainly welcome to call in and give us any thoughts of your own. Today, we have a phone line, 515-442-KPOG or 515-5764. 515-442-5764. Now, I'm alone today, and sometimes that's a little more challenging for me technically. But I will certainly try to get you on the air, and I would rather hear from people who disagree than agree. I don't need mutual admiration of what my opinion is. The question I'm going to ask before I tell you a little bit about Martin Luther King is this. Is racism still alive in American law, or just in the needs or hearts of a few people? Little longer trigger question than I would rather have, but I wanted to make it, I didn't want the question to be biased. So many people, and I really dislike journalists who do this. No, I don't dislike journalists. I dislike journalism that do this. And a blatant example of a leading question, which they're trying to lead you to the answer they want you to give, is, when did you stop beating your husband? When did you stop beating your children? It's implying that you beat your children, and therefore all we really want to know is when you stopped. Now, I could certainly have asked this question, is racism still alive in America, and drop the law, or just in the hearts of a few hatred, bigoted people? See, that's a leading question, and I don't want leading questions. I want a genuine, honest question. So my question is racism still alive in America's laws? Not just America, in our laws. Or just in the hearts of a few people. Not good people, not bad people, not racist people, not bigoted people. I mean, the most leading question I could ask would be, is racism still alive in American law, or just in the hearts of a few racist people? I mean, that's a leading question, and I don't wish to play that game. So, if you have thoughts or questions, 515-442-5764, 515-442-KPOG, and I'd love to hear from you. You can also go on my Facebook and ask me a question there. Welcome to have you either way. All right, so Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1967, I think, 1968. He was assassinated outside of a motel or a hotel. And there's no better way to become a martyr in America than stand for something strong and then be killed for it. And maybe that's just a automatic definition of a martyr. But Martin Luther King, Reverend Martin Luther King, started a peaceful march, a peaceful movement. Yes, there were marches, but I really wanted to say movements across America, so we could see for ourselves. We could see the mirror held up in front of our society to see if we really wanted to be a country that acted the way some people in this country did. I can remember going into a soda fountain. It was not a pharmacy. It was a soda fountain in my hometown. And there were two white porcelain drinking fountains. And one said whites only, and the other said blacks only. And I think that's probably the only time in my life until about probably the year 2000 that I was aware of what racism was. Now, in my hometown, so the first 17 or 18 years that I grew up, we had two black men. They were brothers. They lived together. They were not married. One of them ran our power company, and the other one was the shoe shine guy. And the shoe shine guy was one of my favorite people in the world. His nickname was Bones. And Bones had a shoe shine stand in my grandfather's pharmacy, Penner Pharmacy. And so I would go and I would learn how to shine shoes, because it would come in handy later, because I wear shoes that need to be shined. But he also taught me how to listen. See, Bones knew that when two men or two women, usually men, climbed up on that shoe shine stand, that they didn't realize that Bones had ears and was listening. Even though he was quiet and not commenting, it really probably wasn't accepted for a long time. But he heard everything. And I don't know if you've ever gotten on a shoe shine stand, especially with another guy, but it's a little intimidating. You're higher up than the guy shining the shoes, and you really don't see him. He's not in your plain sight. And it's a very private place to have some private conversations. And I learned from Bones that he heard everything. He knew who was stumping who, and who was buying who out, and who was cheating who, and I mean the whole 9 yards. That's one thing that he taught me. The other thing that Bones taught me, which is a lesson that I have carried throughout my life, I have not been honest to it. In other words, I've not always done what Bones told me. But I tried. And that was, Bones taught me that when I use the word promise, I promise I'll do that. I promise I won't say a thing. I promise what you say will be kept between you and I. I promise I'll never steal from you. I promise I won't lie to you about this. Bones taught me that promise was today we'd call it a key word. Okay? That the computer would flag. He told me that when I used the word promise, God heard the word covenant. When I said, I promise I won't tell anyone what you tell me, God heard, I'm making a covenant with God to not reshare anything that this person's about to tell me. God holds you responsible when you use the word promise. And I tried to carry that with me throughout my life. Especially when somebody would say to me, "Do you promise?" Or I was trying to create a connection between another person and I, that they knew I was being honest and forthright and fully transparent to God when I said, "Hey, I want you to know something. When I say I promise, I mean it." Because God hears me. See, I'm really not saying that to you. I'm really witnessing to you about my covenant with God, my relationship with Jesus. I promise. And that's the other thing that Bones taught me more than anything. I remember the day that Martin Luther King was murdered, assassinated. Not because they said something about it in school, which they did. I don't think they let school out early simply because in our community there wasn't a concern for violence or anything like that, as there was in Alabama, as there was in other places in the South. But I remember stopping by. I couldn't wait to get to Bones Shoe Shine stand, because he had shared with me some things about Martin Luther King. He was not a mouthpiece for him. He was an advocate, but he wasn't actively involved in protest or civil rights or anything like that, probably because he was smart enough to know that. And I hope I say this right, because he and I talked about this, so I know this is a true statement. But in Beatrice, Nebraska, where I grew up, there really wasn't any racism. You know, Bones was treated like as good as any other man, and his brother, for heaven's sakes, ran our power company. So we didn't have racism in my town. At least I wasn't aware of it. I was not aware of racism until I went to the University of Nebraska. And I heard men say things, I suppose women too, but boys, men, say things about other people that were horrendous. And it was simply based on the color of their skin. And see, I didn't understand that. We had American Indians living in Beatrice, and so I was aware of other people of other color and other backgrounds, but I was just never aware of someone treating someone differently. I was, and you could call me naive, but what you can't say is, "Oh, Mac, you were aware." No, I'm sorry, I wasn't. And if that makes me naive or simple-minded or whatever, I'll take whatever you want to put on my plate. But I didn't understand racism until, and I remember the first time we had it, there was I was rushing for Phi Delta Theta. I know that was not the greatest fraternity at Nebraska, but in fact, at one point, long after I left, they lost their charter for a couple of years. But I remember I was in a rush class of young men who were trying to get invited to join the fraternity. And there was some conversation after one of our first meetings, the freshman meeting with the powers to be at Phi Delta Theta. And I remember somebody making a comment and using the N word, and that he'd never be in a fraternity that I'd be in. And once again, I guess kind of stupid, naive, not the smartest guy in the class, I asked this senior member of the fraternity, why would he feel that way because of the color of his skin? Now, quite frankly, I was surprised that I was invited to join that fraternity, and I did join that fraternity, but that young man and we would have another conversation about that when he was a senior and about ready to leave school, because I never forgot that he used that word. and that he made that person less of a person in my mind and his mind, or he tried to make it in my mind, but he certainly did make it in his mind because of the color of his skin. I just thought of this. I don't know how this flashed through my mind. Must be a Holy Spirit thing. I guess there was a time period in my high school life that I learned about racism, but it wasn't black on white. It was the movie Billy Jack, and how those townspeople wanted to treat the Indians different, partially because the color of their skin. But I digress. I'm J. Michael McCoy. It's the 20th day of January in the Lord's year 2020, and I appreciate you being here. I love my job, and I couldn't do it without you. And today it's kind of a tough subject. When I was getting ready this morning and I was thinking about some of the details that I wanted to talk about, I almost started the show by telling you that I'm going to let my hair down today. Of course, given the fact that I've let my hair grow the last few years, that could be a real thing. And no, I'm not going to let my hair down that way. I don't look good. I just wear my hair in a ponytail, and that's about the only way it looks good. But I am going to take some chances. I'm going to take some chances that there are people out there who aren't biased or bigoted, because I'm going to take some chances and challenge you, whatever your skin color is. I'm going to challenge society on the acceptance of the N-word, because don't tell me it's not accepted. It's completely accepted. It's in our media. It's in our music. It's on TV. Don't tell me it's an unacceptable word. Now, bigoted people or racist people would like to tell you that because of the color of their skin, they can use that word. And because of the color of my skin, I can't. Now that's racism. Drinking fountains, where you sit on the bus, whether you can say a certain word or not, because of the color of your skin, isn't that based in racism? 515-442-5764. Put that in your calendar or wherever you might put it. That's 515-442-KPOG. You can also jump on my Facebook. Thanks, Tim, for your comment, and make your comments. They're completely welcome. And if you want to challenge me, you completely can. You can call in. You can text. That's fine. I just ask that you be nice. I'm not looking for an argument. I'm not looking to win an argument. I'm not looking to change America. I just think on this first day of the next decade in a year called 2020, and we are 50, almost 60 years from Martin Luther King's assassination, that it might be okay to talk about this stuff. See, Martin Luther King had it right. Why would you treat someone different because of the color of their skin? And it's so strange how we as a society have politically moved. The people who had slavery and wanted slavery, and whose families and brothers and mothers and sisters and sons and grandfathers died for the right to have slavery, are the people today that would champion the rights of people of any color, creed, or religion. Isn't that funny? Isn't that? It was the Republicans, it was Abe Lincoln, it was the North, it was the whites that said we can't have this anymore, and therefore we had a civil war. It almost divided this nation, which would have certainly been tragic, and we would not be living in the same society we are living in today. The idea of treating someone differently because of the color of their skin is so, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. I just have to, is so unchristlike. I'm sure you know the story of the woman at the well, the Samaritan at the well. Jesus went alone to that well. He went alone because Jewish people were not allowed to be there. This was a Samaritan well. And Jesus knew that when he went there, he was going to meet a Samaritan woman. It's Jesus. He knows everything. And he knew that his Father, he in the flesh, would make sure that went in the book. So we would learn a couple of things. One, quit this bigotry, quit this racism. Just because you come from a different place or have a different colored skin, Jesus didn't care. You know, we see these pictures of Jesus all the time, and he's white with blonde hair and blue eyes. Now, I'm going to try to move away from a shot I have here because, well, actually, I'll move this camera if you're on Facebook. This is a portrait of Jesus painted by Mike Brangoscio. And Mike Brangoscio is a local artist. And when I first saw this picture of Jesus, I knew that this is what Jesus looked like. This is how Isaiah told us he looked. Dark skin, dark eye, dark hair, not very attractive, short, insignificant. But it's the way he really looked. Jesus was not a 6'7", towering, blonde-haired, blue-eyed man who had a perfect white coat, robe, and gave the peace sign all the time. That was not who Jesus was. And Jesus never taught us that anything other than one's actions made us different from anybody else. Our creed didn't make us different. He was Jewish, for heaven's sakes, and he allowed us to start a whole new religion. Hey, come here, let me tell you a secret. Psst, psst. See, we should be Jews because he's our Messiah. But the Jews rejected him in most cases. And so for whatever reason, Paul, Peter, the start of the Catholic Church, and I mean Catholic as in Christian, not Catholic as in a denomination. And I don't know if Jesus would even like the fact that we call ourselves Christians, because Jesus' name was not Christ. Christ means Messiah. So we are really Messiahans, if that's a term. But I digress. It's 25 minutes after 10 o'clock on the 20th day of January in the Lord's year 2020. I'm J. Michael McCoy, and thanks for listening. I love this job, and I couldn't do it without you, and thanks for letting me kind of let my hair down today and ask some tough questions. Martin Luther King was known for many, many things. He was known for starting peaceful marches to protest the way that white society was treating black society. And by the way, this mistreatment of people of different color, once again, was in the South, not in the North. There were not separate water fountains or places on the bus in New York City, depending on your color. New York City, and the only reason I use New York City, but New York City, Boston, those were the big cities of the 17 and 1800s. Those different drinking fountains, those different seats on the bus, those different seats at the soda fountain were found in the South. And this is where Martin Luther King was raised, born and raised. And he knew it was wrong. He was a reverend. He was a man of God. And he knew it was wrong to treat people differently because of the color of their skin. And how did he know it was wrong? Jesus taught us that. Simple. Here's a few of my favorite Martin Luther King quotes. By the way, if you're just joining us, we're going to start talking about a question in a minute. And that question is racism still alive in American law, or is it just in the hearts of a few people? And you can chime in at 515-442-5764. You can jump on my Facebook page and make a comment. Thank you, Christopher. Love to hear from you. I just ask you to be nice. If you disagree with me, that's great. If two people always agree, one of them isn't necessary. If two people always agreed, we wouldn't have a country. But we need to be nice about it. Here's one of my favorite Martin Luther King Jr. Quotes. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And remember, Jesus was called the light. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only what? Love can do that. Life's most pertinent question is, what are you doing for others? Another Martin Luther King Jr. Quote, I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have that final word. Another great quote of his was, the time is always right to do what is right. And of course, well, two more. We may have all come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. And of course, his most favorite quote, which was a part of his I Have a Dream speech. And by the way, I was going to play a part of that on the air today. Whoever owns that, and I would assume it's part of the King family, I don't know. They've done a great job of making sure you have to pay for using it. Now, I probably could have found a piece of it. I found a piece of it on my phone, but it was 40 seconds long, and it was just his voice saying, I have a dream. But here's the quote, and you should know this by heart. This should be a quote that is a part of your life. Whether you were alive in 1968 or whether you were just a glisten in daddy's eye, you live this quote if you live in America. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I don't name drop. I have friends that do, and they're in this business, and I think it sounds really crappy. But I'm going to name drop once. Years ago, Tamara Scott set up an interview for me on the radio with Martin Luther King's, I think it was his niece. And she was the most beautiful, kind, wonderful person I have ever met. She had no hate. She was not mad about racism in America. She was not mad that her uncle had been assassinated. She loved the fact that her legacy was him, and that she could now come into America and talk to people about racism. And with only a few would she be cast aside. Most had great respect for her uncle, Martin Luther King Jr., and she was very, very glad to share anything that she knew about her uncle and how America could certainly be better because of her uncle. All right. Is racism still alive in American law? Or is it just in the hearts of a few people? I'm going to ask you a question. And I want you to think about that question. When Martin Luther King was alive and marching and striving to get freedoms for all people, no matter what their color of their skin was, we had a completely split society. If you had a different color of skin than a white person, if your skin was yellow, which is usually used in a Asian community, or it was brown, like in a Latino community, or it was red, like in an Indian, a natural Indian community, you were not allowed by law to do some things. You couldn't drink out of the same drinking fountain that a white had. Now, remember, back then, drinking fountains were part of the blood of life. You know, we didn't have bottled water. And sometimes people just needed a free drink because they didn't have money in their pocket to buy a Coke or a beer or whatever it is they wanted to drink. So water was the lifeline, bread and water. Of course, demonstrated through Christianity as the blood and the word. Water was a necessity. And so to tell somebody they couldn't drink from a public fountain, that was kind of dipping into the, hey, this is, I need to live. You know, I need to drink water to live. And then we got so bold as to, and I'm so glad I wasn't alive in this era, that we as a country decided that we would, okay, we won't be racist anymore, and we'll put in a drinking fountain for blacks only. And so whites had theirs and blacks had theirs. See, we aren't racist. Bones would tell me about that. And, you know, you got to admit that is kind of funny, that we think we're doing something good for someone of color, so we put in their own drinking fountain. Or where you sat on a bus, Rosa Parks, God bless you. Or where you could live, what side of town you could live on. If you could join a golf club. And I can tell you right now, there was a day that Des Moines' first big country club, which was Wakanda, did not allow people with the color of skin other than white to play on that course. Have you ever heard of Hyperion Golf Club? Out there by Sailorville Lake? Do you know why Hyperion was started, began? Do you think it was just because there was this beautiful land and it'd make a great place for a golf course? No. Wakanda wouldn't allow Jews as a member of their club. So the Jewish community, which was very strong, still is in our community, had to build their own country club. And by the way, they always welcomed Protestants and Christians. So we got to this point in our country that they could ride the bus, but you had to sit clear in back. And if a white person needed that seat, you had to get up and get off because you couldn't stand on the bus. We're going to put in 2 drinking fountains because that's how unracist we are. You blacks will have your own drinking fountain where you lived in town, where you could work. It was unheard of back in those days to have a person of color to have such a reputable responsibility in the community as running the power company, which was the case in my hometown. 2 men, brothers, not married, no kids, lived together. One ran the power company. One was my buddy Bones, who was the shoe shine guy. Our community didn't see color. At least I never saw the color. And, well, wait, you know what? I can back that up. Bones told me that one of the reasons he and his brother liked living here because it was so different than Omaha or Kansas City. Back then, you know, Little Beatrice, southeast Nebraska, was a town of 13,000 and a county of 100 and mostly farmers. There were no black people. But if we traveled 3.5 hours to Kansas City or 2 hours north to Omaha, then we would see an African-American population. And if you went down to St. Louis, New Orleans, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, there were a lot of African-Americans. And this is where the fight was held for whether they can be free or not. 23 minutes before the hour of 11 o'clock, I'm J. Michael McCoy on this Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, 20th day of January in the Lord's year 2020. And I want to ask you this question. And as I said in the beginning of the program, but if you weren't listening, this is not a leading question. And I'll tell you what a leading question would be. I really believe that this is an honest question, not leading you to give me the answer I want or forcing you to defend a position that I know I can defeat in a debate with you. Is racism still alive in America's laws, or just in the needs and hearts of a few people? See, I really wanted to say in the hearts of a few broken, racist, bigoted, hateful people, but that would be leading. And I added the term America's laws because that's all America can do, is make sure our laws set the example for a unracist community. I am sure that if I had some people of color, black, African American, I'm not sure what the political correct phrase is. I'm not a politically correct guy, so hopefully you'll put up with that. I'm not sure how to say this correctly, so I ask for your forgiveness up front if I am in any way rude. But I don't think there's a difference in our communities when it comes to employment, holding public office, living where you want to live, driving what you want to drive, going to school where you want to go. I don't think that racism, that level of racism, is a part of American law. Now, I know there are people who have racism in their hearts, and therefore we have racism. But is it just okay for me to say this? We had a black president for 8 years. Obviously, we are not a racist country. Now, someone who wants to propel or advocate that there is racism all around us will cry foul when I bring that up. But they can throw the yellow flag all they want. For 8 years, we had a good man and a good family as an American president, and he was black. Was he my favorite president? No. Reagan was my favorite president. But was he a good man? Was he a racist? No. No. And we elected him not once but twice. So I would ask you the question, is racism still alive in American law? And the answer is no. I'd love to hear it if you don't agree. Phone lines are open. Facebook's open. 515-442-5764. 515-442-KPOG. Now, before I get into my final point of racism, which is going to be the N-word, for those of you who don't know, I owned a business where on February 13th of 2000, a black man died and racism was yelled loudly. I owned a nightclub where we had someone who we felt was selling drugs. He was asked to leave. He left, came back in, and assaulted one of the white bouncers, one of the two white bouncers who were football players at Drake University at the time. And this community that we live in, this town, this was 20 years ago, not 50, not in the 40s, not in the years of slavery. This was just 20 years ago. And this town flipped out. Now, I must say that it was less the town who flipped out and more the media. More of the newspaper and their desire to sell newspapers. And so it was headline every single day. It was television stations where one anchor, news reporter, actually said one night on TV, suspected murderer J. Michael McCoy. Now, I was home in bed when it happened. But I owned the facility. My name was on the liquor license. And therefore, the news media took it upon themselves to drag me into the argument. Now, I'll give you a long story short. I went before the grand jury. There were no charges, and I was not even asked to testify. That's how uninvolved I was. But when you own a liquor license and something terrible happens in the establishment where that liquor license is, it gives the media and those in government who want to point fingers permission. I'm not saying they have the right, but they have permission to make a big deal out of it. I had the N-word spray painted on property. N-word killer. I had a gentleman who actually said he would not eat at one of my restaurants because I killed a black man. Can you imagine how hard it was for me to sleep? Can you imagine what the devil, what the accuser, what the spirit of Jezebel was doing between the 8 inches between my ears to me in my head? Can you imagine the fear I had of illegal retribution from different parts of our society? I was called before the legislature. We had a black mayor at the time, Akayo Samad, who, by the way, Akayo was amazing. This guy, whatever group of people that he led, and whatever name you want to give them, I'm trying to think of what the name of his business was. Urban Dreams? No, that was Ford. Creative Visions. We had a meeting down there one night with a lot of angry people who thought that this black man had been killed by these two white football players inside my building. And yet peace maintained. We had to close the business, which to me was just common courtesy to the family. And we lost everything there. There were marches from Creative Visions up Martin Luther King Parkway, which I think at the time was still, I don't know, I think it was called Martin Luther King Parkway. And then westbound on Hickman, and then right to the business, which was, at the time, it was in front of Best Buy. It would be in Felix and Oscar's Pizza. It was the building in front of that. There were, sometimes when someone dies someplace and the flowers come out and the signs, and there's There's kind of an Evermore memorial to these people there. I know there's a white 10-speed on Grand Avenue. And it was because somebody died who was riding a bicycle, and so they painted the bike white, and it's still there. But there was that type of memorial in front of that business. My children were threatened in school. There were people who wouldn't eat at other businesses of mine. There were people who said I was responsible because of the, and I'll never forget this, because of the orangutans I hired as bouncers. Orangutan. Now, if you don't know how it ended, oh, and by the way, the news coverage was daily. Daily. How it ended was the first witness called to the defense was the county coroner, who testified that the young man who had died, when he went outside, when he was asked to leave the club, he obviously had smoked a cigarette that had been dipped in formaldehyde. Yes, that's the stuff they replace your blood with when you're going to be buried. That he had smoked a cigarette that had been dipped in that or soaked in that, and that caused his lungs to have paralysis. And when he got excited by coming in and assaulting one of the bouncers, he collapsed and died right there on the moment. Trial over. No other witnesses called. Found not guilty, not guilty. Of course, we were then sued in civil court for civil death, and the lawyers handled that. The lawyer for the other side was the Johnny Cochran. So if you've ever met someone who isn't of color, that would be moi, who has been right in the middle of a public racism accusation. You now know somebody, and he's right here in your town. And let me make something clear to you. I'm not racist. I don't hold anything against those people because of the color of their skin. I have a respect for Akeo that he's just an awesome guy. I have a respect for Mayor Daniels, who is now much retired, because of how he kept it together and how he kept our community together. I have respect for the mother and father of the deceased, because they actually came in, sat in my restaurant, and told me to my face they hold nothing against me. Even though the press media was trying to make me out a bad guy, anybody that was a part of that facility was trying to be made to look like a bad guy. It wasn't just me. I was just the chief. So I was a target. I had after that not guilty, and it all went away, I had more people of color come to me and apologize for the way a very, very few in the community had acted. A very, very, very few in the community had acted. And therefore, the second half of my question, or is racism still alive in the hearts of a very, very, very few people? It's not in American law anymore. The color of your skin makes no difference where you drive, where you walk, where you drink, where you eat, whether you vote, where you live, the position you have inside of your company. It doesn't matter. I mean, the gentleman who ran, was it principal? What was Indian? We had a black president. There's just, I shouldn't even have to point that out in 2020. But if I know Martin Luther King can't see me. I know my Bible well enough to know he's not up there and he's really proud of what I'm saying. I know that's not true. But if it was, it'd be true. Let me tell you about the type of people that keep racism alive in their hearts. I'll start with the most obvious. The Ku Klux Klan. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, they still exist. They visited me during that whole episode and asked me if I would come speak to their group. It's in the book. I turned from them and I walked out of the facility that I was in, and I never, ever, ever, ever saw or talked to anyone that I knew was associated with that organization, because that organization is bad. It's sad. Yes, they have a right to be here because this is America. Because if they can ban them, then they can ban my club or somebody else's club. So they get to be here. But what disgraces of Christ's children they are. Here's the other group. It's the people that use the N-word. They use it in music, on the radio, in movies, on TV, in public, and if challenged, because I made the mistake of challenging someone of color when they use that word, it is a excuse to become violent and rude and lose their mind because a white person can't use the N-word. But because of the color of their skin, they can use it. So we have young children. You know, racism should be dead with the millennials, and I think it almost is. But there are still those bad seeds out there who put it in their music and put it in their movies. And man, I was listening to something the other day. What was it on TV? Oh, yes, it was. It was a promotional commercial for the Grammys. And they were playing some song of some artist that I don't know. And there it was on CBS or NBC or CNN or MSNBC, whatever I was watching that they were advertising the Grammys. There was this person singing a song with the N-word in it over and over and over and over. How do you explain to a child that their skin color should not make any difference in today's society when there are people being idolized for using that language in their music? And if you dare to think I'm a racist for saying that, then you and I need to sit down and have a cup of coffee. Because the person who determines that the race makes a difference is the racist one. I don't want to use the N-word. I think it's a horrible word. I think it should remain a horrible word. But it should be a horrible word for one and all. However you choose to spend your day today, I know you have access to a computer. Most people do. I hope you just, put in MLK quotes or I have a dream or something and realize who this man was. He was a good man. I don't know if he intended to give his life. I don't know if they knew that the rate was high that he might be hurt or assassinated or attacked, or his family would be. I don't know. But he is the father of freedom for people of all color, including white, in the United States of America. And I honor him. Pa, Papa, I hope he sits in your lap in heaven. I don't know if there's the better people or the worse people in heaven. I hope we're all just the same. But Papa, I pray to you today that you would just walk over to my brother Martin Luther King Jr. and wink at him and tell him he's still loved. And he made a difference. And he made a difference that made such an outstanding generation to come after him, that most of us choose to not see color. That, as you said one time, that your children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but they will be judged by the content of their character. I'm J. Michael McCoy. Thanks for listening. I love this job. I couldn't do it without you. We'll see you tomorrow, 10 a.m., right here on Max World Live, on webcast1live.com, and on KPOG 102.9 Grimes, West Des Moines.
The new KPOGLP, Power of God Radio.
Holy, holy God Almighty, spotless Lamb for sinners slain. Worthy, worthy, thou art worthy. Lord, we praise your holy name. We adore you, bow before you. Let all of heaven and earth proclaim you alone deserve the glory. Lord, we praise your holy name. Lord, we praise your name. Lord, we praise your name. Lord, we praise your name, God Almighty. Holy is your name, righteous is your name, name above all names, God Almighty. These old roads can bring back memories. Take you back to years gone past. We'd been traveling for 3 days. I can't remember before that. We went to Jerusalem for Passover feast. I thought he was with them, they thought he was with me. Oh my Jesus, are you gone forever? But through God's own eyes, it may not seem that long. Precious Jesus, this just isn't like you, but it's just like me to always get things wrong. And a sword goes through my